All right, if everyone's good, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming. The title of this talk, the title of the session today is Support Client Onboarding. So specifically with clients whose sites that your organization did not build. So starting to work with clients who maybe you weren't familiar with the original build or perhaps even the original requirements of the site. The talk is mostly geared towards project managers and account managers, but I think it'll be relevant for anyone in the room who might be working on any project or any client site which you weren't directly involved in building. So, hello, I'm Madison. I'm with Digital Bridge Solutions, Client Services Director at Digital Bridge. So I work on project delivery and also work pretty heavily with Nicholas, who's joined us in the front corner on the support side. Just a little bit of an introduction about me. So I've been known to embrace messes. So this is something I didn't build. This is a house that I've been working to restore, and I thought that it would be nice to lower the basement with a shovel. So I've been known to get into messes just a little bit. Get in, you work really hard, and you dig in, and sometimes you realize you get a little deep. So working on a client site or working on a site that you didn't support is kind of like getting into projects. Luckily here, I didn't get in over my head, just up to my knees. So the outline for today's session today, so the things we'll be covering. First, understanding your client's support needs. Secondly, when you are engaging with a new client who has a pre-existing site or a pre-existing platform, how to size and kind of gauge their support need, especially in initial conversations. Are they the right fit for you? Are you the right fit for them? Third, once you've kind of moved past the qualification stage, structuring a site audit with that client to kind of understand better what you're getting into. And fourth, how supporting and how providing support to your client, especially the person that you kind of have day-to-day direct contact with, can help them be more successful in their jobs and really make them look like a champion within their organization. And lastly, how you can support your team, how you can support your developers and your own support team when you are introducing a new client or a new platform that is something that your organization did not build. So, why me? What is it about my role that makes me the right person to talk about this? So, I've helped manage the support team at Digital Bridge Solutions for 7 years. Before that, I worked at a couple other organizations and always had a involvement on the support side. So, very used to the support challenges that we've seen and that other organizations have seen. We've got about a little more than 30 supported customers currently. And I would say, I don't have the exact numbers, but I'd say out of that, roughly half of those are sites that we did not originally architect or originally build. Now since then, we've done quite a bit of customization to those, and we've taken them on as our own. But for a number of those, we had a pretty high ramp-up period to understand kind of how the site was constructed, what goals it was trying to serve, and how we would best manage it. Support accounts for about 20% of our business. So we do a lot of project work, probably like most people in here, but we also do a ton of support work, and we're trying to do more of it. I think the goal would be maybe kind of a 70-30 split between the two. But for us, support is a very important component of what we do. Also, as I've alluded to earlier, my personal experience with messes, so I'm slowly remodeling a house. And the thing about remodeling a house is it's very similar to working on a website in the sense that, I don't know if anyone's gone through this process before, but when you bring in an electrician and when you bring in a plumber and they look at what was done previously, the first thing they say is, oh my gosh, this person did not know what they were doing at all. And for me, in my experience, that's very similar to what you hear from a development team. every time you open a site's code base that you haven't worked on previously. So a lot of relations can be drawn between the two. I think at the end of the day, when a developer does get into that position, that is the initial response and reaction, but they find that they can learn a lot once they understand kind of the position that the last team was in when building the site. Also, I have a Great Dane that's addicted to toilet paper. So in terms of cleaning up messes, super familiar. This is what I come home to probably 3 days a week, so I haven't quite trained him out of that yet. A little bit about the organization I work with, so Digital Bridge Solutions. We primarily work on e-commerce projects. Our work is split a little bit between Drupal and Magento. We probably do about 60-70% Drupal, and then quite a bit of Magento support as well. We are a sponsor this year at MidCamp, been sponsoring the last couple of years, and we have a few people speaking today and tomorrow, so go check out those sessions. A quick poll of the group here today, so just kind of who do we have in the room. So in terms of project managers, account managers, anyone who kind of identifies in that realm, raise your hand real quickly. So we've got a few. How about on the development side, technical side? Okay, great. Anybody else that would like to self-identify with what they do and what they work on?
I'm a student, so I'm currently trying to find my role.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, great. And and we have something else. What was that, DeAndre?
Okay.
Oh. How about those in the room? How many of you guys work for organizations that provide support services? Maybe about half or so. How about organizations that provide support services for sites that you guys did not build? Okay, all right, great. So you guys know, you kind of know what you have to go through this process. So at the end, we'll do some Q&A and discussion, but I'd be interested to get other people's take on how you guys have smoothed this out over time. Does anyone work for an organization that says, nope, support's not my thing, not going to do it? Cool. So I think as Drupal as a community, when I first started working with Drupal back in 2009, we would see that more often, that people would kind of build sites and just like leave them out in the wild, because building is historically known as fun, and supporting the site is sometimes kind of a pain. So why would you embrace a new client for support? So if you have a client who comes to you, why take them on? Kind of why deal with that headache in the first place? Well, for us, I think there's a number of items that we've identified over the years. So there is a real client need to have support. So someone built their site, Drupal, Magento, whatever the technology is, more often than not, the client is left with something that they don't quite understand. Maybe they've received a little training on, but really with the technologies that we work with, they're not quite capable of maintaining this thing. So providing them, helping them to satisfy that need for us as organizations who deliver Drupal services provides a lot of future opportunities with that client. It also builds trust very early in the client relationship. So if this is someone who you're going to be working with for a long period of time, getting in and providing, building a support relationship shows them that you can come into a challenging situation and help kind of smooth that out. Very high value for your client. For us as an organization, it helps create financial stability. And I think that's, in the last few years, why a number of organizations in our space have started looking at more of doing support and support retainers. That financial stability usually comes through, and we'll talk about it a little bit, comes through a retainer or recurring revenue type agreement where you'll continue to provide support throughout the relationship. Number 4, for all of us on the team, it really kind of pushes us out of our comfort zone. So if you're working on a site that you've never worked on before, maybe you have to see how people have built that. You have to see what technologies they've used, what processes they've used, and you get exposure to ways to do things, ways to meet goals that you would not typically do yourselves. So number 5 kind of touches on that again. Oh, that's how others do it. And that's usually, at first that could be that's how others do it. But then once you spend some time with the site, there's usually learnings that can come out of that as well. They're super valuable to your organization. It helps provide, so taking on a new support client helps provide perspective on technical debt. And what that really means is, as we've taken on more support clients ourselves, when we are working on project work, you start to work on it in the context of, hey, we're going to have to support this thing for 3 or 4 years. And that kind of starts to change how you architect the site. And maybe some areas where you thought it would be okay to do things faster or to cut corners, you start to realize that's going to be a big pain, a bear to support down the road. So having that perspective helps you build better sites for your clients. And 7, maybe there's some intrinsic good to all of this. So clients need support, so it's good to be there to offer it, for them to have an outlet to receive that. So support models, and this is support models that our organization uses. So we engage with clients typically in 2 different fashions. So one would just be ad hoc. So we have a support line, and if we've had really any previous relationship or engagement or introduction to a customer, they have a very low barrier of entry to having a contract with us, a lightweight contract that says, hey, I can call you guys at any time and receive support. For those of you, I think most people in the room provide some level of support. Anyone else in here who does this, who just allows kind of people to call in if you've had like a base level relationship? So, okay, a couple. So for us, it is a first come first serve basis, and if we are tied down with project work or retainer work, it may take a little while to get that level of support. So it's not necessarily something they can get same day, but depending on the issue and depending on the priority, we do try to service those ad hoc needs. In addition to that, we offer more of a retainer option, and that retainer option gives clients the ability to engage with us for a certain number of hours per month. And what that provides to them is a lower rate per hour, but it also provides priority in the support queue. So when they call us with an issue, if they're under retainer with the organization, we'll move on that quite a bit differently than we do on just an ad hoc support call. So those are really the 2 ways that we engage and provide support to our clients. So let's talk a little bit about how you would determine the need that a client would have when they come to you and ask for support. The thing that I think we realize more and more is not every organization needs a high level of support. We deal primarily with customers who have e-commerce sites, and in the e-commerce world, support's critical, security is critical, performance is critical, uptime is critical. Content world as well, these things are very important, but there definitely is a special need around e-commerce that support provides. So these are the questions I would ask when you're starting to engage with a client. So one, is the website strategic to the client's business? And what that means is, what that means to me is, if the website went away, what would that mean to the client's business? Is it critical to have that site up and online? So to the next point, what would happen if the site was offline for a day? So ask, I think that's totally fair to ask kind of during the sales process, see how they react to that and how they respond to it. If there were a data breach, if someone got a hold of their database and all of their user information, would that matter to them? Would that matter to the industry that they're in? Are they storing any of this data? Are they storing any information? And also, take a look at the client's internal team and internal makeup. Do they have Drupal developers on their team? Do they have any technical resources? Typically, what we see is organizations that come to us that have a really healthy support need, they will have a director of marketing, a director of e-commerce potentially, but they won't have, those individuals may not have a big team to support them underneath them. So they'll be looking for organizations to outsource their different support needs to. In terms of sizing, so you've recognized that there is a need for support for this client. How do you determine how much support? So you have to keep in mind the amount of support that a client needs is really dependent on their situation. The value of that support that you provide is dependent on the client's business need as well. One way you can think about this, and especially on the e-commerce side, it's a little bit harder to measure on the content side, but the support need can be estimated based on the annual revenue of the client's site. So if you know that they're selling $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $10 million of business a year, there are rules of thumb out there for kind of how to estimate what they need to invest per year to keep that platform online. And that varies, by the way, depending on industry. But sometimes that can be as much as 3, 4, or 5%. So you can start to have a real conversation with the client saying, hey, if we budget this much for support, does that still make sense based on the amount of volume that your site's doing or the value of the leads that it's generating? You can also view support as an insurance policy. So sitting down with your client, having a conversation around, if something were to happen, what would be the cost of recovery? In our world, many times that's considered on the e-commerce side through a data breach. So if you do have a data breach or you do have a violation of PCI, which is the credit card industry standard for how data should be handled, remediation of that breach can be very, very, very expensive. And for some organizations, that would be enough could potentially be enough to take them out of business when you talk about the fines and penalties. So when you talk about the value of having a support team or a support organization looking at performance and security, it starts to get easier to quantify what that number would be. And then lastly, using a site audit as a tool to start to understand, qualify, and quantify what the client's actual support need is. And we'll talk about what a site audit is in just a second, kind of what we put into a site audit in terms of scope. So the structure of the site audit. So before you engage with the client, before you take on their work, or before you especially in like a retainer situation, you want to know what you're getting into, and you want to make sure that you do your due diligence, both for yourself and for your team. So auditing their site before you start providing support and going over your findings, it really provides protection for both parties. So it provides protection for yourselves as an organization and for your team who is supporting the site. It also provides protection for your client because they can start to understand their current situation and what type of risks that they're taking on by not having support or by being in the with their site being in the current state. One big benefit of doing a site audit to your client, if you're trying to sell this in, and by the way, like the other organizations, are you guys doing site audits before you engage in a support context? So when some do, some don't, some do some of the time. But when you do, like one benefit that we've seen is that there's a time savings per issue that's realized when you invest a little bit of time up front to have a base level broad familiarity with the client's site. So what that means is that there's cost savings to be had by doing an initial upfront investment, and that's definitely a conversation you should have during the sales process. For us, site audits are required for our retainer level clients. So if we're going to take somebody on and we're going to work with them for 40, 60, 80 hours a month, we need to get a baseline understanding of what's going on with their site. We do not require it currently to audit anyone who's coming in through ad hoc, where we're just kind of doing break fix or small enhancement resolutions. For us, one piece of information I really wanted to share with you guys today is what we found, and I'll be curious at the end to see what other organizations have found, but the intersection between kind of what a client is willing to engage with initially when they haven't worked with you before, and the intersection between that and kind of the amount of time that your team needs to get into the site and start understanding what's going on usually requires about 32 to 60 hours of work, roughly. And our site audits fall usually between that range, just depending on client complexity and complexity of the site. So recipe for a site audit. So we won't go through all of these things individually, and I'll make sure these slides are posted on the MidCamp website. But we had a number of criteria, a number of things that we do to review. So first and foremost, everyone asks for all the documentation, and the client says, I don't have any documentation, right? So first thing you do is review all the non-existent documentation, and then there's several other things that we go through to audit, with the goal being to really understand in a broad stroke, where they are from a performance standpoint, from an SEO standpoint, from a security standpoint, and then also from a development standards and a development best practices standpoint. One key takeaway here, and something that we always do, and I feel is really important, is making sure before you start work with that client that they are protected from any unknowns, that they are taking steps to back up their database, to back up their code base, to have not only code versioning, but making sure that their code versioning is being stored off the server, that their database backups are being stored off the server. They have some type of continuity plan. When you get into a situation, you start to work with a site that you haven't worked with before, that is a great way to make sure that you're protected and the client's protected from some change where the impact may not fully be realized. So regular support for clients, why does that make the client more successful? Like, why does that make your stakeholder, your marketing director, your e-commerce director, how does that make them more successful in their job? First, so having a provider who's working within the site, especially on a monthly retainer basis, it provides smoothness for the client moving forward. So if they have a new issue that comes up, if they have a new enhancement that's being requested by their customers, there's less of a hurdle to getting that done when they have someone who's engaged with them on a regular basis. A big component to having some type of retainer engagement is the fact that you now have communication with your client. And when you're taking over a site that you haven't built before, quite frankly, you're going to start to realize as professionals in this industry that there are things that they should be doing to make their site more successful, to help achieve their objectives. And those monthly check-ins or weekly check-ins or however you structure it are really good to turn into more strategic planning sessions. So working with your client to create a roadmap for how they can get from their current state to a state of higher achievement. A well-functioning site, so it's kind of obvious, but it really increases stakeholder and end user confidence in the site and in the platform. And for the person that you're dealing with day to day, who is the site owner, it's going to be great for them because that means that the organization is more willing to invest to further that platform or further that site along. And lastly, stability, performance, security are all super important for SEO. So Google, Bing, Yahoo, they're all measuring for it. If you have a site that has even semi-frequent outages, and those outages are seen during crawl states, that can have a huge impact on SEO. If your page speeds are slow, if you're having security issues, like all of those things can impact your business. So supporting your support team. So now you've taken on this client, right? You didn't build the site. You got a team of hungry developers that are ready to work on new technologies, and you say, okay, we're gonna work with our new client. We've already started making some promises that we can get them into a healthier spot. So how can you make that transition to your support team easier? So first, just ensure adequate ramp-up time. So for us as an organization, especially when we're working with a new client, we don't necessarily charge or bill for every hour that it takes to get familiar with their site initially. Some of those things we view as a business development effort. The reason for that being is we know that there's going to be a lot of opportunities down the road with the client, and we want to have some type of baseline efficiency before we start billing them for services. Second, help prioritize efforts with your client that's going to result in the site being easier to support for your support team. And that one may not be obvious at first, but that has a big savings to the client. And what that would mean is if they have a non-standard process, if they're using SVN to manage code and your whole development team is familiar with Git, they may not see a direct benefit into switching technologies or into changing processes. But if you as an account manager or project manager can show that that's going to lower the effort for your team, you're going to have happier developers and a client who's saving money at the end of the day. Building client-specific documentation. So it's really important, and it's a discipline that's hard to get into. At Digital Bridge, we have a client wiki that's pretty healthy with client information in terms of how to support and how to manage each client that we're working on, but it's taken some time to get there. Track the environment over time. So in terms of as you're working with the client, hopefully you're improving what they do, and you're improving the shape of their site. So what we've started doing is keeping kind of a health log of the client. So we've created a scoring matrix to say, hey, how healthy is this client? How good of a support client, or a client to support, I should say, are they? And that score sheet starts to track technologies, tooling, workflow, those types of things to say how in line are they with your business and how in line are they with other clients. Lastly, really important as well, but I recommend anyone who's kind of getting into this world to think through kind of what your standard staffing model is going to be for clients. So right now ours includes a dedicated project manager who knows kind of the ins and outs of each client that we bring on. It's backed by a support manager who is familiar across all of the clients that we support. And a minimum of 2 developers. So what that means is you really need 2 people within your organization who are familiar with every site that you're going to support. You don't want to have a situation where somebody's out sick and a call comes in and you can't handle that without 4 or 5 hours of ramp up or reading through documentations before you can support that client. So just a couple of examples that I'll show really quickly, and again, these will be in the slides, but when we create client documentation for clients that we take on, we basically outline the following items. And this isn't heavy documentation. We're talking a page on a wiki, page and a half, something like that. But we really want to explain to a new developer, a new person working with this client, what the situation is, what the client's trying to achieve, why the site's there, what the purpose of it is, functionality that they have, any gotchas that we've been able to identify, just issues that the site runs into. How do you get access? How do you get access to all the systems that they have or that they're connecting to that is dependent for running the site? Release process, super important. All the developers need to be able to ramp up on being able to promote code out to production if needed, and information on backups and just business continuity if something were to go wrong with the site. The scorecard that I mentioned earlier, that is how we're starting to track the health of clients over time. So usually when a client comes on with us, they will have say a grade of 30%, which means out of the criteria that we have, maybe 30% of those are met. We do not have a client that has scored 100%, even clients that we've worked with for a number of years. But what this helps us to do is quarterly, we can audit kind of where a client is and make sure that they're on the right path to improving and having a site that's better for themselves and better for us to manage. So, wrap up here, struggle is real. Struggle with managing clients whose sites you didn't build, it's tough, but it's definitely doable. So, a couple of things to keep in mind, or a couple of things that if you're getting into this world, to be aware of, and things that we struggle with still kind of in our day-to-day. One is clients come to you with technologies that aren't necessarily Drupal. So they have a Drupal site, you start to audit it, you start to work with it, and hey, it turns out that maybe part of it's also powered by WordPress, or part of it is powered by some e-commerce engine that you haven't touched, or they have a couple of pages written in Angular or Node, and maybe you don't have that skill set on your team. So just be aware of that as you're getting into these situations. Demand is kind of tricky to resource. So Sometimes clients hit you all at once with requests, and sometimes they don't. The session right before this with Chris Rooney and Joe Purcell from our organization talked a little bit about how to handle some of those management challenges. In terms of a client who's engaged with you on the support side, we have heard this a few times. So I'm supporting you, or you're supporting me. Why should you be responsible for building the new site? So just kind of be aware of that as well. But you don't want to be pigeonholed. And I think we're just about at time, or right at time. So hey, we've got about 1 minute. We should finish up. Be aware that work is more expensive when handled in support than when building a new client site. That just means that making changes to an existing site is time consuming. And lastly, be aware that at some point in your relationship, you're going to transition from the person who rescued them maybe from some situation to the person who's now responsible for their site. And make sure you're aware of that and can kind of manage to that. All right, that's it. Hopefully I think we got done just about in time. Any questions from that? Any thoughts? Yes?
So you mentioned kind of transitioning. I'm wondering how isolated or how separate your groups are within the organization, or if you found success with having, like, these people are support people, these
Yes.
people are maybe the people that do audits, the people that do the newspaper.
So we've just started hiring. We have one person right now who's dedicated to support, and the rest is a shared pool of resources. So over time, we're going to start separating that out more. And there's actually, I could point you to last year's MidCamp. We actually did a talk about managing support and retainer clients and projects with the same resource team. But yeah, I mean, in short, it's good to have those separate, but right now, kind of everyone's trained up on doing both.
How do you manage the fine line between supporting the website versus supporting the server and the hardware? Do you run into those issues if the client wants to host themselves?
It's client specific. It really is very client specific. So we have a couple of hosting providers that we work with if they're looking for hosting. But we do have a number of clients that'll come to us and have everything from Azure to platform to AWS to whatever else. If the client wants us to help with those things, we definitely will, but we kind of have to draw bounds around that and ramp up time and kind of familiarity. We do also set the expectation that it's going to be more expensive for them to work on a hosting platform that we're not super familiar with, right? Because everything's going to take a little bit longer. So over time, as trust is built, we do try to migrate them off into something a little bit more standard for us. So everybody's hungry, right? Yeah, it's lunchtime. All right, well, if you guys have any other questions, contact information's on the slides. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time.